I'm here. I'll start by introducing Bryan Lamkin, who is one of us, an alum of our school. And as you saw from the agenda, there we go. There we go. As you saw from the agenda, is a senior vice president at Adobe. I'll give you just a little bit of background on Bryan. He and Shantanu Narayan, the CEO at Adobe, and really there's a whole team at Adobe that's remained very close to the school and super helpful to all of us. So I'm thankful for that. Real quickly, he's been at Adobe for a total of about 17 years. There was a 14-year chunk that started in 1992, and then he left for a few years, and he's been back there for about 3 years since then. So he's really, senior product roles is where he found his spot and has added so much value. So when you think about Photoshop, a product that we all know about, when you think about Creative Suite, sort of how that evolved, what it became over those years, he was instrumental in playing that role. And now today, in his even more senior role, he has come back to Adobe. That was in 2013, Feb 2013. And Creative Cloud is one of the things that he's been instrumental on, Document Cloud. So a lot of the sort of software as a service transformation and the cloud transformations that we're seeing for Adobe and throughout the economy, he's been right at the front of that as well. So, Bryan, thank you for being here today.
My pleasure.
We appreciate
I've been looking forward to finding the right opportunity to come back and visit with you.
Well, thank you. You know, this is the tech energy, not just at the school, but in the whole economy. One of the themes that we touched on this morning is sort of like, well, I asserted that tech isn't an industry anymore, that it's sort of, you know, you hear airline CEOs saying we're a technology company with wings. It's
apparently
sort of
it's
like,
eating the world.
So. It's truly shifting the dynamics in so many industries. But we're focused here mostly on kind of career management. How do we navigate? And you're the senior-most person that we've got here today. So let me ask this: you've come back, or you came back in 2013 to Adobe, and you have the role that we just described. What's exciting you most about your current role?
Well, what excited me this week is talking about 7,000 customers down in Los Angeles. So I just recently, about 3 weeks ago, took over as the general manager for both the Creative Cloud in addition to my previous responsibilities. When I came back to Adobe in February of 13, I started off, and kind of Shantanu and I have always been close, as you know, and I started off re-engaging with the company and running the corporate strategy and corporate development, and then kind of assembled a group of the core technology groups, Adobe Research, the centralized design groups, and security, et cetera. And we just, when I took that job, I told Shantanu, I'll do this for a while, but I would never want to work for a company that would call me a CTO, so you better go find a real one at some point. So we actually hired Ave Parnassus a couple of months ago as a CTO, and so we've shifted some of those core technology functions back to Ave.
But that frees up room.
Exactly. So it had more capacity, and David decided to go off and be CEO of an emerging company, and so we kind of brought the digital media clouds back together. So Creative Cloud and Document Cloud are reunited and doing great things. So one of the first things I got to step into is taking over all of the keynote presentation duties and presenting to the financial analysts, et cetera. So I'm really jazzed about everything that we've done to transform the way that organizations and individuals engage with documents with the Document Cloud, but I'm equally excited, if not more excited, to be back with the products that I kind of was part of the early adolescence and birthing process on. So products like Photoshop and Lightroom and the Creative Cloud.
Exactly. Well, I mean, it's just kind of remarkable. My wife is quite a photographer and does a lot of work with as everybody who does that with Photoshop and Creative Suite and things along those lines. And when we start to think about where creativity comes from and how creativity defines what is valuable in almost any business, sort of encoded creativity. I was just describing to them, it was one of our senior co-alums of the school. I was having lunch, this was probably a year ago, I don't remember who it was, but his question to me over lunch was, what's your content strategy?
Sure, right? and I think that's a question that everybody's asking.
And it's a perfect question, and you ask it all the time. As the dean of a business school, it's kind of like, ooh, I probably should have been asking that like the last 5 years. But we don't frame our business that way.
I think it's a very relevant question. If you look at, I mean, everybody talks about digital transformation now, right? But if you look at some of the key challenges are the more that companies become design-led and design-focused to deliver the right engaging consumer experiences, because I mean, you guys know it. If an app or a website doesn't engage you, you're on to the next thing very quickly. I'm not saying that you have that short of an attention span in class, but outside of class, you do. And so, I think it's what's paramount right now is that content-led, design-led process within organizations that really allow you to define the right engaging experience, personalize those experiences, and keep the attention, right?
Yeah.
And 2/3 of people, if they aren't delighted by the content of an app or the content of a website, they're just often running for the next thing. And so what happens is that level of engagement and the diversity of screens that you need to engage people with, not to mention paper, although that's going away eventually, it just explodes the amount of content that you have to manage, because you're dealing with all these different formats and you're dealing with all these different experiences. So I think it's a very relevant question that we've really optimized our business around, and we're trying to help lead the Fortune 500 and beyond through that transformation.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of ed tech, and not just higher education, K through 12 as well. I mean, as my background's in economics, right? We talk about information goods, right? But we typically had non-durable information goods, right? Bryan Lamkin stands up in front of a class and gives a lecture, right? That's non-durable. But now increasingly it's durable, right? It's captured, it's distributable, and
Absolutely.
That's a different game. And anyways, I know you know that, but that's part of how it's really different here. How about this question? So you've had experience in the startup world. Adobe's not one of the largest organizations in the world, but it's a significant organization.
Sure.
So help us understand what kind of, that feeling of entrepreneurship feels like in a larger company.
I mean, I think that larger companies in general struggle with innovation and entrepreneurship. It's something that you have to be very mindful about creating the right environment, creating the right incentives, creating the right culture to foster. And it's easy to have bubbling pots of projects on the back stove that people are working on, but and there's innovation that will spring from that. It's much more challenging to actually innovate at scale, right? And if you think about the moves that we've made at Adobe, it's been very much about both core product innovation. How do we really build experiences that delight on new platforms like mobile, like tablets, et cetera. But equally importantly, if not more importantly, is how do we innovate the business model, right? I mean, we're a 30 plus year old company that has, as I've experienced my journey at Adobe, has gone from a licensing business through OEM printer manufacturers. That was the genesis of the company with PostScript, to a desktop application business that, and when I ran the businesses, the graphics business in the 90s, it was very much about, I used to think of my teams as these loose pirate ships that were really competing in individual categories, and they would really only come together and unify on common goals if there was very clear advantage to the teams, mutual advantage. And then we went to the creative suite, and kind of innovating on the business model and getting people to really pull together as one suite was innovation, but it was still packaged software. We were still packaged software running most of our business through two-tier distribution. And then along came the Creative Cloud, and I think that was a different scale of innovation that really forced us to think about product not as the binary that you put on the desktop or the binary that you put on the handset, much more as an end-to-end experience from the SEO and SEM programs all the way through customer retention and how we're engaging customers within the products. And so that type of innovation at scale is a much bigger challenge. And so I think that comes from really bringing the right DNA together to do it, by being very clear what the goals are that you're trying to achieve, and by being a leadership team that actually fosters risk, and there's a level of forgiveness in that in the short term. There's not much forgiveness in the long term. We only need to succeed in the long term. But the level of experimentation on the business model, if I look at the permission that Shantanu granted the team to go really transform, it was quite large.
And so when you think, it's interesting to hear you talk about that transformation, because I think some people from the outside might think of that as a technological transformation. And as I heard you speaking, it sounded a lot about organizations and people, right? That this is a management challenge first and foremost.
Very much so. I think it's a leadership and management challenge.
Yeah.
I think there are, if you think about it, the model of Adobe and the success in the early days of the application software business, our model was very much build kick-ass products, build category dominating and category defining products, and then do a great job of communicating the value of those products via PR and having very early adopter engagement around some of the biggest influencers in the category. But there wasn't a lot of investment in infrastructure and et cetera. There's investment in manufacturing processes to be able to get the cost of goods down in the box and getting those out there. And there was a lot of investment in localization and some core shared technology around imaging pipelines, et cetera. But it was not it was a known problem to put software into the channel and make that successful. I think a large part of it right now has been around transforming business processes, transforming core competencies, moving from box manufacturing to scalable cloud and all the compliance and the security and everything that goes along with making that successful. That's that's DNA. We always had a lot of wicked sharp people at Adobe, but not of the same DNA or not of the same experience set that could actually lead us through that level of transformation.
Capability, isn't it? That I think, I'm sure a lot of people, obviously in your industry, but even in adjacent industries, it's sort of like, oh boy, there's a bunch of skill sets out there.
Exactly.
We know we're going to need a lot more of, and because we see it going in that direction.
But you want to bring it in at the right level in the organization so that you can bind that to the goodness that you already have. Because I think you've got excellence. You don't build a company as strong as Adobe without having excellent people that you want to bring in the influence, and then kind of allow those leaders to teach the rest of the team how to kind of come along for that journey.
That's interesting.
So it's not a swap and replace. It's more how do you sprinkle a little bit of new spores in the organization.
Well, that's a really important idea, isn't it? Because when you think about good old-fashioned change management or change leadership, right? It's clearly a lot of intentionality, and what might be a good way to do it in one firm in the same industry might be quite different than another, right?
And we want to do it in a way that's consistent with our culture. We're a very people-oriented culture. We're very customer-focused, but we're also very focused on creating an environment where people can succeed, where there's an empowerment, and there's people can innovate at a rapid pace. And that mindset, I think we wanted to stay true and authentic to all constituencies as we manage through the transformation of the company.
Could you say, then we'll turn to kind of inflection points in your own career, but could you say a little bit more about, you talked about sort of the risk tolerance of people and the experimentation, and what does that really look like? Is this about performance evaluation systems, and how do you make sure people are experimenting as much as you want?
I think when it comes to core product innovation, it's really just staffing your organization with people who are inclined to experiment, who are inclined to innovate. So at Adobe, we have a couple hundred research engineers who are the best in their domains, whether it be in computer vision, deep learning, core graphics and imaging, who that's the way they're built. We take them out of the PhD programs and we put them in the labs, and they're everything that what we call the Adobe magic in the products is a lot of it emanates from those groups who are doing some of the most creative things in imaging and photography, all the way to the best science on optimizing web campaigns for digital marketing. So we have teams that are that's all they do, right? Then you need to build the bridge to the operating teams, or to think of it as the product teams that are really putting out commercial releases, and that bridge building is really, really critical. If you have a research scientist who has written research level code who wants to transfer that into product code, if you don't have the right DNA on each side to do the handshake, it'll sit there forever on the shelf because you won't know how to go about that. So we actually have teams that are specialists in technology transfer who can think like a researcher but write code like a production engineer to get it into product. And so we really think through not just can you create the cool stuff. I mean, we can. I set through every quarter 30 or 40 demos of the cool new stuff, but the key is, can you get the cool new stuff into product and actually delight consumers and customers? And that takes a bit more of a thoughtful process.
That's a great problem statement or opportunity statement as well, right? It's sort of, that's where the value is really getting created.
So you're thinking about it systematically. It's not just work hard and innovate. It's work hard and innovate, and then be very disciplined and thoughtful about how you transfer that technology into product.
Fantastic. Great way to frame it. So going back to sort of navigation and careers and in some of your earlier stages, what are there a couple of inflection points where you kind of said, bang, that one I moved at an angle on that day.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, help us hear about
Yeah, so
that.
I mean, I'd say that first of all, Haas was instrumental in my early career decisions. I did 2 degrees at Berkeley. Undergraduate, I was a modern languages student, so I studied French and German here in Europe for some of the time. And when I came out of school undergraduate, I was thinking about getting into technology, but this is back in, you guys won't even know this reference, this is back in the WordStar days, okay? This is pre-Microsoft Word, pre-Office. It was, we were still loading programs with floppies on, you guys know what floppies are, right? So, floppies, okay, all right. And so back then there just weren't that many real opportunities in tech. Like you guys have a wealth of opportunities now. And so it was between, I had 2 job offers. One was to go down in Orange County somewhere and work on mainframe products, and that didn't really ring my bell. And the other was to actually start off with a medium-sized software company to help build a localization group for the Western European markets. So for me, that was a great fusion of my international interests. I'd spent a couple of years living abroad. I was one of 9 kids who grew up in the Central Valley, and so when we went on vacation, we went camping. So but I got passionately interested in languages, so I just had this desire to go live abroad and have more of an international experience. So before even coming there, I spent about a year in Switzerland and Germany to practice my German. So when I actually graduated, I chose to join a company called Software Publishing. They had a product called Harvard Graphics that was a competitor to PowerPoint back then, and helped build out their European operation. And it was still possibly the best job I ever had at that stage of my life, where you could get to travel a third of the time to Europe, sign up all these distributors, set up manufacturing in Ireland, and just have live the global life, so to speak. So that was
early stage.
Yeah, it's very early stage. I was fresh out of undergrad, right?
Yes, yeah.
And in that exposure, what I became more and more excited about was not the fact that I could actually develop extended character font sets to let us localize product, which was important, but it was more, how do you light up this international business? How do you think about distribution? How do you think about market entry? How do you think about scaling manufacturing and really building a scalable system for that? And more I engaged with the global product teams and product management teams to do that. And I looked at that and said, no, that's the direction I want to go. I don't want to just be working on the international component. I wanted really to go down a path where I had more global responsibility. And so at that point, my wife was finishing up her PhD. She's the egghead in the house. She studied human nutrition and biology here, and is still associated with the College of Natural Resources here. But so there was only one school I wanted to go to, and that was come back to Cal. So I came back and got my degree, and then launched myself coming out on more of a global product management career. Ended up at Adobe in '92, and had a great early 14 years there.
Great products.
And then I'd say the burning desire at that point was not that Adobe wasn't a great place and I was having a great time, but it was more I just always had the desire to spend time in the venture community and in the startup world. And so after playing hooky for about a year and focused on the family, I ended up splitting my time between 2 venture firms, between Sutter Hill and NEA Ventures.
And that was 2006 when
I came out, and then spent a bit of time at Yahoo working on their consumer business, and then came out and started 2 companies, and we sold each one of the companies after a short stint, one to Twitter and one to First Data in the mobile payment space, and those were great experiences, and I had fantastic teams, but I missed the global business, and I missed the scale.
Well,
I missed just being able to play with bigger Lego pieces. So some of the big ones that we all are using, and then the global. And Shantanu kept bugging me on top.
Yeah, did he? Yeah, well, he's pretty tough. He's a persuasive guy. Was there ever a time? This is kind of an out of left field question. I'll preface it by saying, the dean who preceded me, Tom Campbell, was tapped by Schwarzenegger to be the director of finance for the state of California. And I found myself in his seat as the acting dean. And that was sort of the imposter syndrome moment for me, right? It's like, okay, let's see what happened. Was there ever a point in your life, in your career, where you kind of felt like, okay, I'm sort of overextended, but we'll see what happens?
I think we all have those moments, right?
Yeah.
This week, walking out on stage in front of 7,000 people with about 2 weeks of prep to
put
my speech together. It was a little ask Nadia. There was that moment, right?
Yeah.
From a leadership standpoint, I think every step up for me has been met with a little bit of trepidation about, okay, do I know what I need to know? Exactly. Am I ready for this? And that lasts, maybe lasts a couple of months until you really get your sea legs underneath you. I'd say, honestly, that, when I left Adobe the first time, I was managing a very diverse global organization of about probably 1,500 people, and going down to a startup of 36 people was as challenging as anything I did, right? Because it
felt so different. Huh?
It felt so different, and your activities are fundamentally different, and the product, really focusing and having your whole existence every day focused on product market fit and getting the product right. A lot of it has to do with the stage of the company as well, but we were at that stage where Clover's now a very successful part of First Data. I don't know if you guys see them around Berkeley, but they've built think of it as Square, but for more of an open stack on Android. And so they built out a very elegant integrated hardware software POS system. When I joined the company, and it was a Sutter Hill funded company, one of the VCs I'm closest to, it actually catalyzed the company. When I joined it, the early business model was not that at all. The early business model was think of Groupon as an ad network. It was basically a second price auction ad network and we launched 2 weeks after I joined. And I joined just because it's like, for me, a lot of those decisions are less about, is this the path to the light on the hill and, what I've always dreamed my career will be in the end. It's more about, am I going to gain a set of experiences here that is going to kind of fill out my repertoire, so to speak. And so I could, coming in from a couple of years in startups and coming back to a large organization, there's a lot that you learn in the startup world that makes you think differently about how you help larger organizations succeed from an innovation and from an agility standpoint. At that stage, I was just this is a wicked smart team. I mean, I think it was Kevin. Were you the one that was in robotics? Okay, so one of the lead machine learning engineer had won RoboCup 3 years running. So I mean, this is like one of the best machine learning guys in the world in robotics, and so it's just this great team to be involved with. But more than anything, it was like, hey, I want that experience of building and scaling a company at this stage. So we launched the product, fell flat on its face, right? 2 weeks in, and we were like an order of magnitude off of our conversion rate we needed to make a successful run of the business. And so for a month, we tweaked and did growth hacking to figure out, could we get it right? Couldn't get it right, so I had to lay off 2/3 of the company and reset the business model. And the next one was basically Venmo, right? We were Venmo, 4 years before its time. And we launched and we knew how to get the payment network running for just peer-to-peer mobile payments. And our end goal was to actually do mobile checkout, but you needed credentialed wallets to get to that. But we couldn't raise funding on the timeline we needed funding because we'd burnt through a fair amount of cash on the first business model. And so quickly we said, okay, we were all enamored with two-sided marketplace, right? That's what we wanted to do. So we couldn't do that. So we ended up saying, okay, we're going to do a pure enterprise play. We're going to figure out a partner strategy in the payment ecosystem. We're going to build this stack. And within 2 months, boom, we just hit it and got acquired by First Data. So long story short, it was, for me, those decisions were much more about the experience. It wasn't about, am I going to be on the front of the Wall Street Journal or Time Magazine? Not at all. It was like, hey, I've always wanted to do this, and the experience of actually struggling through, and there are painful, nerve-wracking moments. Yeah, they are. But finding product market fit was just fundamentally a good thing to have done.
Well, I think that's a pretty common feature of a lot of extraordinary careers, this notion that, a lateral move or even a move down, but it's sort of like it's about the experience rather than kind of the continuous upward ascent necessarily, right? I want to make sure to leave room for the students, so if you have any questions, if you'd come up to the microphone, that would be great. I'll ask one more question, and for those of you that want to come up, please do. How did you know? So I guess you did the Slavic languages thing as an undergraduate, but this whole global element of who you are, I'm guessing that it has served you a lot in your more senior roles. The idea that this person has multiple geography experience, and this is really valuable. Could you say a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I think it's. first of all, I love it. So that's my main motivation. Is I married my wife not because she's a Peruvian, but because I fell in love with her. But there's one more global aspect.
Yeah. That's it.
But I've always kind of viewed the world through a different lens, having this passion to kind of acquire language skills and be able to engage directly with people in different cultures. And I'd love to keep doing that. As a little harder now that you're so busy. Yeah. But I think so. There's a passion for it, and I have some of my best lifelong friends are in Europe. But I think it does. I think it's recognized that it brings a lot of value back to the business in your role. So that when you're, when I was running corporate development, I was running an acquisition project, and that took me from London to Munich to Zurich, and I'm just being totally comfortable in those cultures and be able to engage with teams that you're trying to woo.
Yeah.
We bought Neolane in Paris a couple of years ago, which is now Adobe Campaign. Being able to be on the ground and actually engage with the teams and really never fully immersed in their mindset, but I spent a year studying in southern France when I was here at Cal, and just really having a much better understanding of what motivates them and the cultural aspects of what they're going through. I think it sets you up better for international success.
Absolutely, it does. How about some questions from students? Who's got one? Thanks, please.
Thank you very much for joining us today, Bryan.
Can you let me know what your name is when you?
Yeah. So my name is Jay Schilling. I'm an evening and weekend 2017 student.
Great.
So the question I have is, I guess regarding two things that you said. You said a lot of times you step into roles that you find yourself asking, do I know what I need to know? And there's a couple months of trying to figure it out. And also with the unsuccessful launch of the product that you just talked about, how do you deal with keeping that ambiguity from being something that paralyzes you? How do you work through those months of difficulty and ambiguity?
I talk a lot. And honestly, it's you never. The CEO in startups as a CEO, it's not as lonely a place as being the CEO of a large company, I think. But I definitely made it a less lonely place than many others might. I never treated all of the problems as my personal problems, as personal as you do take the success of the company. But I treated them as team problems, and really was quite transparent and open with the teams on what we were going through, and how we needed to think about the transformation of the company. So a lot of it was like when we didn't. One of the most frightening moments was when that first business model, we knew it was just going to be a flop, right? I don't think anyone's figured out what we were trying to figure out, and that's maybe an indication. When we didn't succeed there, we basically pulled the senior leaders in the company. Pretty easy, 36-person company. So, and the five of us got together, and we spent 3 straight days just talking about our options, figuring out how are we fair to all the employees that had come along for the ride, but knowing that we had to make a transition, and that we were within 8 months of running out of cash at the current burn rate, and we needed to clip the burn rate. So, so it's really just, you're always, 90% of it's on you as the CEO, but being engaged the team in a way that helps you figure the problem out and diffuse some of the personal stress that you bear going through those events. So.
Nice orientation. Thanks for that question, too. Question here, please. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Claire. My question is sort of about, as we sit here at Haas, sort of finishing up, I'm a second year, a lot of these people are first years. What skills do you think we should be trying to collect for sort of our career in tech? You sort of had this global strategy coming in to your first job, but sort of what do you think we should be working on right now where we're still able to take the classes that are offered?
Sure. Part of the answer is I'll reflect back on what my experience was here and what I consider the most formative. And then the next was, I think, what is more contemporary and more relevant to what all organizations are going through today. I think the courses that influenced me the most and that were, I think they're just eternal skills, are the strategy courses. That for me, I studied under David Ocker when I was here, one of the leading strategists for brand strategy, studied with Ravi Glazer, who was an excellent professor in marketing strategy, and really thinking about. I mean, I literally when I was done with my thesis, I had Michael Porter tattooed on the back of my eyelids. I knew that book so well. So, and thinking about competitive strategy at the core, I think the technology markets, if we can call them technology markets anymore, because all of those, everything we do is influenced by technology at this point. But the rate of change is just so high that if you can think about competitive strategy, building competitive moats, and thinking about how you manage in a larger company, how you manage your portfolio competitively, that's essential, and that's never going to change. And I'd say that experience really influenced me later on. Later in my career, I'd say the one book that influenced me the most was Innovator's Dilemma, and that I think is fundamental to how technology eats the world, basically. And it's funny because I reflected back on my experience at Adobe after the fact, and I saw it through that lens. It's like I didn't know that's what we were doing along the way, but when we made Photoshop a success by taking imaging away from proprietary systems down to the desktop, or even just early desktop publishing, or the transformation of the documents business with Acrobat, and the transformation of the video production business with Premiere and the rest of the video tools. Every step of the way, we were basically taking what was a technology that was kind of Mandarin, that was studied and known by a few, and democratizing it and bringing it to many. And we continue to do that today with, look at our Photoshop technology we're putting on the iPads. I mean, I downloaded the latest app at 9:30 last night and was up until 2 in the morning playing with this stuff. It's so easy to use relative. So I think that whole innovator's dilemma of how you think about displacing and disrupting businesses, I think is fundamental. And if anyone hasn't read that book in the room, then first of all, you should ask why, right? But you should read it if you haven't. Today, I'd say one of the biggest challenges for organizations at any scale is digital transformation, and how do you really change the business and focus it on consumers in a really focus on design and engagement, and the whole concept of content velocity. How do you drive a kind of content strategically to be prepared for the level of personalization that current and future consumers expect across devices? And all of that, in my mind, where there's underlying technology that we build across the media groups, the groups that I manage, that kind of prepare those assets. I think the bigger impact is from the product lines that we have on the digital marketing side, where the way that you think about your customer engagement, and you think about audience segments, and you think about how you communicate and engage with them, and think about how you measure and analyze their behaviors. It's a much more data-driven and scientific process, and I would make sure that whatever role, whether you're going into a robotics startup or you're going to go work for Clorox in brand management, I don't know how many in the tech group are thinking about that, but it does happen. No, it doesn't.
It does.
That you really think like a digital marketer. You think about engaging audiences around your products at scale that way. So.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that question. Other thoughts, questions?
My name is Clark Smith. I'm in EWMBA as well, 2017. Very impressive that someone with a languages background might even entertain the idea of being a CTO. So I'm curious to hear your experiencing managing a technology over a long career where the technology has changed dramatically, and how does that define corporate development, specifically in a big tech firm?
I mean, I think that from a corporate development standpoint, so more from an inorganic growth and a corporate strategy standpoint, we're very focused both on, how do we keep pace organically with the product lines that we have that bring innate value to customers, and so evolving the transformation of our existing lines. How is Photoshop relevant from the day that we bought it to we just had its 25th anniversary this year. So how do you keep the products being relevant? I think that's something that Adobe has done better than most organizations. But then being outwardly focused enough and savvy enough to understand where the gaps are that are emerging. In the early days, 6 years ago, we were a digital media company. That's basically what we were. We had asset lines that were for print, web, video, publishing, and we had our digital documents business, and we were evolving that to be more kind of end-to-end document workflow oriented with our lifecycle business. But we realized at that time, and I'm going to say we here when I was off building a payments company at that point, so just here's the corporate we, at that time, that a lot of the value that we needed to realize in the market was not locked up in the content, but it was the way that the content moved through the engagement pipeline with customers, right? And with consumers, and how do we help organizations realize more value in that content? So that's what led to the Omniture acquisition. That was driven very much by the corporate development group, and the head of that group at that point kind of read the tea leaves of where, not just where the market was going, but where we could realize more value in the value chain, which led to the birth of a $1.5 billion software SaaS services line focused on digital marketing that's growing bookings at 30% a year, and that's been one of the key growth drivers for the company, and frankly speaking, one of the key perception drivers for a much more extended kind of value proposition and brand presence for the company, where we're not just about the content side of the house, we're about helping businesses transform for the modern age and direct digital engagement with consumers. So I think that it takes when you're at scale, and we're about 13,000 people right now, and we're still in the middle of a big transformation of the company. When you're at that scale, it's never one answer of it's all going to be solved by M&A, or it's all going to be solved organically. You need to fuse those strategies and make it make sense together. So did that answer the question?
I think so. And in addition, I'd be curious to hear how you've managed your own growth personally to manage all of this information that wasn't necessarily your background when you stepped into the job. Yeah.
So I've always been, I've had an affinity for technology, but I've never written programs, right? I got close enough to the development process with helping to build out the international product strategy and managing the localization toolkit development, et cetera, that I got close enough that I understand how products are built, and I've always not just prided myself, but had an affinity, like to spend time talking to the engineers. So whether it's a research engineer, and I was one of the early advocates of building out a research group at Adobe, research engineers to the production engineers that are really principal scientists that are doing the great stuff across the product line. So I think it's through that regular engagement and and spending time across different segments and companies, different scale in the industry, I've just been exposed to a lot that I learned enough that I can help steer the boat without necessarily needing to be in the engine room.
Thanks for that question, and thanks for that answer. We do talk a lot about students always, but you're getting that sense for the key transitions in his professional life. Sort of, you've got to turn up that absorption, or it's going to be tougher. And also that notion of there's this concept of the new science of leadership, and part of that new concept is it's not just having all of the skills embedded in Bryan. It is Bryan having relationships with enough people who truly have those skills that he can access them through his network and relationships when he needs them, right? That's a very different way of thinking about what great leaders are great at. And I think that's also a kind of students always function at some level, right? You've got to know what people do, or you're just not going to be able to sort of put that together. I have one more question. I'm sure there's some more, so don't hesitate back there. If you got one, please. Let's turn to you then. Yep.
Cool. Jonathan Morin, Evening and Weekend Program, first year. You talked about a few inflection points where Adobe had to pivot as a business, like transforming into a cloud services subscription is a big example. Were there parts of the organization that kind of dug their heels in and, talking about the innovator's dilemma, said, no, this is the way we've been doing things, and this is the way we should continue to do things? And do you have advice for those to, I guess, get around those challenges?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question, actually, very apropos. I think anytime you do a transformation at the scale that we did, there's resistance both within and beyond the organization. I think that moving from a perpetual software model to a more of a SaaS model, subscription model, we met a fair amount of early resistance in our customer base who, people had just been used to owning their software, and that was something that they could still own their software. It's just the future versions we were going to actually bring to subscription, and there was resistance there, and it wasn't really if you think back on why we did it, and this is both internal and external, engineer who's been building a software application for 15, 20 years, wants to keep doing it kind of the way they do it. They've been good at it, right? And they perfected their skills. Just being really clear about why. You don't just change because you woke up someday and said, let's all change. You change because you have a reason to. And if you think about our challenges then, from a customer standpoint, we were not able to deliver functionality fast enough to customers to address the world that was changing around them. Customers went from print to, okay, I have to publish to the web. Then, oh, okay, I'm going to start doing multimedia CDs and video. That actually happened before the web. So I'd publish to the web, and all of a sudden, with the explosion of mobile devices and the fragmentation of the mobile platforms, and then screens on a wall that you need to target, it just got to be too much, and more personalization requirements. And so the customers, even from the content side, they just have to move too fast. And given the way that we were on basically a 12 to 18 month software cycle, we couldn't deliver the innovation fast enough. And frankly speaking, from a financial standpoint, we were a bit hamstrung with how we actually were able to roll out releases, and the whole rev rec issues around releasing new updates, and is it a bug fix or is it a new feature? And so we just didn't want to be hamstrung, and we wanted to innovate for customers and really serve the customers. And so just from a core innovation standpoint, we had to move to subscription so that we could innovate on a regular basis. I mean, we put out, over the past year, we put out 1,000 new features across the Creative Cloud. You can't do that in desktop software. You can do it once, and then boom, a new device ships, right? And all of a sudden you're behind again. So I think that the pace of innovation was critical. From a business standpoint, the Creative Suite's $1,000 software package. Call it $1,000 plus or minus. It was really hard to bring in new customers into that business, right? It's like not everybody can buy a Mercedes. So moving to a subscription model, all of a sudden, 20% of our customers are new customers, and they're able to sign up and get going very quickly. So we were able to actually grow the customer base much more effectively. Before we went to the subscriptions, we were kind of stuck at about 3 million annual customers, a lot of customers, right? But you want to grow that base. And so it really gave us much more ability to grow the base. And then with the advent of all these fantastic mobile platforms, all of a sudden we can design our software for new segments of the market that are, if you think about it, at our core, we're all kind of creative, but not all of us are going to spend the time to learn the 12th generation of Photoshop, right? It's a pretty complex product. So being able to use the new platforms and the touch interfaces, et cetera, to deliver the same elegant functionality, but make it much more usable, all of a sudden we're expanding the user base by leaps and bounds. And so I think that being able to convey that and really stick to our guns and show the innovation that was coming. Like when we first launched Creative Suite, or Creative Cloud rather, part of the criticism was, well, it's a cloud installer for desktop software. So we hadn't demonstrated the fulfillment of the vision. I think now, if you sign up for Creative Cloud, you'll see that it is a very complete creative ecosystem across mobile, cloud, and desktop, and we're able to unify that experience in a very compelling way.
Thank you very much.
Super helpful perspective. That was really, really helpful. Let me try one more, and then maybe we'll have time to go for one more to the students, and we'll conclude. You mentioned the competitive strategy as sort of this forever skill set, and I think you have had an ability, Adobe certainly has, of kind of looking around corners. So when you think about sort of the sensing capability of Adobe or the sensing capability of Bryan, I mean, are you disciplined about trying to look out ahead? How does that process work, or is it just you listen and you read and things click?
First of all, you stay outwardly focused. I think that a lot of companies, as they scale, it gets more and more challenging to look out, right, and stay engaged. And you particularly when you're in the middle of a transformation, you tend to focus internally on how do I fix these systems to transform. I think we've been pretty disciplined about keeping a wing of the organization that is perpetually outwardly focused, right, and so that we're always sniffing, so to speak. And that is, I'd say that's not something that we've always done as well as we do right now. I think that's something that we're particularly good at right now. A lot of it's intuitive, but this is where I think a lot of companies will have more of a segmented roles where I'm responsible for product management and I'm responsible for engineering, et cetera. At Adobe, it's a product team, and a lot of the intuition can come from anywhere, right? The innovation comes from anywhere. Yeah. The intuition can come from anywhere, and I've always prided myself in with teams like the Photoshop team, from the early days. I was as happy to put Thomas Knoll, who is the founder of Photoshop, the creator of Photoshop, or Mark Hamburg on a stage to do a keynote as to put myself on the stage, because frankly speaking, they knew the customers, they knew the segment, they knew the disruption as well as I did. And when we navigated through the disruption of digital SLRs and the opportunity that created, it wasn't me going in a dark room figuring it all out. It was talking to Thomas, talking to Greg Gilly, who ran development for me at that point, talking to Mark, and really stepping back and saying, that these raw photos, they're fundamentally going to change how we interact with photography. And this is both, it's a threat, but it's also an opportunity if we get it right. And two things came out of that. One is that we came out with a unifying format called Digital Negative that was basically, think of it as the postscript for raw photography, where we had because the formats got fairly balkanized across the manufacturers, and so we tried to offer a unified alternative to that. And we came out with Lightroom, because all of a sudden it wasn't about doing the composites or tweaking the color on individual images. It was more about, I'm shooting 300 images when I go out shooting today, and I want to make sure that I'm making decisions about those images and applying those decisions across a range of images that share common characteristics. Those ideas didn't come from me. When we talked about the problem, I helped strategize, okay, how do we build for that? And could we do that in Photoshop? Because you always want to extend your current product, and we did. We put our camera raw pipeline in Photoshop, but it's like, no, this is a new opportunity. This is an opportunity that will move the number of people who engage with photography beyond the 265,000 pros worldwide that was the addressable pro market at that point, to millions of people who have a whole new platform to come in on. And I think we've seen that play itself out pretty well.
Super example.
So it's I guess I'm a little long-winded.
No, this is a hard area.
Trust your complete team. Leverage the skills of everybody involved. Don't segment your thought processes.
I think that also, of course, takes a leader who is trusted, right, for those conversations to happen, and to happen in a productive way. They don't just happen out of thin air, right? Part of that is the dynamic that a manager or leader creates. I think we have a last question here. Thank you, sir.
Hey, thank you again for being here.
Pleasure.
Your name?
My name's Amin Asser. I'm a full-time MBA, and I'm a second year. One of the interesting headlines that we've been seeing out of the tech industry as a whole is around diversity. I'm really curious to get your perspective on, number one, why does diversity matter specifically for technology? And number two, thinking about the conversations that you have and sort of like the senior suite, is this something that's being discussed, and what's sort of the future? Thank you.
Thanks for that.
Great question. It's absolutely being discussed, and it's being discussed much more than you probably realize on the outside. I think it matters because you can't build successful businesses in the long run unless your workforce represents the markets that you're targeting. So if you don't have people that are thinking about use cases that are appropriate for a segment or a segment of the audience, et cetera, then you're never gonna be as complete in terms of the product offering that you build. And you'd be surprised with how many things are little things that make a big difference that are easy to overlook in a product if you don't have a balanced team that's approaching that. So, and I think that when I think about diversity, it's both gender and kind of ethnic diversity, but it's also diversity of skills that you want to bring to the challenge. It's as important to have the balance across gender and ethnic diversity. It's also important to compose teams that are diverse teams. Think about the mistakes I made early in my career of putting together teams that are too much like me, right? And don't get me wrong, I think I'm a wonderful guy. So, but too much of me, ask my wife, it can be a bad thing. So yeah, building teams that are all kind of just the same DNA, driven the same way, it doesn't really bring out the best in terms of the products that you're building. And it wasn't really until probably 15 years ago I realized maybe I can mix things up a little bit and get more benefit from different kind of character attributes across the way. But I think bringing it back to the gender and ethnic diversity, I think we talk about it a lot at OpStaff. We're not. I think we're kind of in the pack with the rest of tech firms, maybe a little better than some, but we're not happy with where we are. And the way that we think about that is everything that we do where we are presenting an image, whether that's within the company or beyond the walls of the company, we're keeping that in mind. So if we have the opportunity to balance out a presentation lineup on stage and make that a more diverse representation of the company, we're not doing so to fool the system or trick the system. We're doing so that we can inspire others of these diverse backgrounds to come and engage with us and join us, whether they're customers, their future employees, et cetera. When we go through kind of interview rounds, we try to keep the teams very mindful about what's the composition of the interview panel you're putting together, and does it represent and reflect the diversity that you're trying to bring into the organization. So we're pretty mindful about that. We have a long way to go, and a lot of this is starting the process at kind of early stages of the funnel. The reality is we don't have enough graduates for the whole industry to have as diverse a workforce as we need in technology, and we need to make sure that we're actually creating that diversity within the education systems that we can all benefit from later in the career cycles of the population. So it's something we talk a lot about, think a lot about, and we manage increasingly mindfully of that.
Yeah, thanks for that question. It is really important. As most of you may not know this, but we, with the students' leadership, a full-time MBA program to use as an example, but we had been running like other top 10 schools, sort of 33% women. The students put together a set of initiatives, and we moved it to 43% within 1 year, and it's stuck basically at that level now. Not stuck, but it has achieved that level for 2 years running, and we see more running room going forward. And just as one concrete example, the students helped set up Barbara DeSore, who's the CEO of Citibank, one of our alums, super busy. We said, in this 2-week period where this woman who lives in New York that's kind of interested in finance needs to decide between Haas and those 3 other schools, would you call that person? She said, I would be happy to. She made a couple of calls for us. Sabrina Simmons, the CFO of The Gap, made a couple of calls for us. It's sort of like, everybody feels good at the end of that, and it really helped move the needle for us, among other initiatives. So I know you at Adobe are doing a lot of that stuff as well. But
yeah, if you put your mind to it, you can move the needle. So.
And so we're part of that upstream system, and we're going to do our best to deliver on that as well. Let me say, just in concluding, that Bryan, you are just an outstanding exemplar of what the school represents, these defining principles, our culture, the type of leader that comes from Berkeley, and we appreciate your taking so much time with us today.
My pleasure. And my parting words would be, and I think this is just one of the best experiences I had in my life, and that was when we were in the bowels of Barrows, right? And so you guys have a much nicer existence than I have, but I think that what Dean Lyons has done with the program over the years, and Tom Campbell before you, it's a tremendous institution. I'm proud to say I come from the same cloth, and I'm happy to be able to come back and spend time with you guys. So I hope this isn't the last time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.